And good morning, welcome, afternoon. It just seems like morning. Anyway, welcome to the Deal Doctor Livestream, Monday, 1 o'clock. Today I want to talk a little bit about unilateral terminations. I'm going to talk about a number of topics, but we're going to start at unilateral terminations. Now, before I get into it, I want to mention that there are a number of different purchase agreements that you all are working with out there, depending on the association that you belong to. So I'm going to talk in generalities, but when I use an example, I'm probably going to refer to the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement because that is the one most used by five-star agents. There are others out there that we are using, like the TAR forms, the Traverse Area Association of Realtor forms, the Jackson Area Association of Realtor forms, GCAR, and so on. So you need to refer to your own purchase agreements to get the exact language when it comes to unilateral terminations. The most common is going to be the inspection contingency. And in most purchase agreements, it allows the buyer to walk away and get their earnest money deposit back if they determine that the inspections aren't satisfactory to them. What does satisfactory mean? Just what it says. They're not satisfactory. I don't like them. I don't like what the inspector found. It doesn't really matter if the inspector found a cracked light switch plate cover, which costs 98 cents at Meijer. It doesn't matter that it's something that minor. It can be anything. But the inspections have to take place in order to invoke that aspect of the inspection contingency. Now, I'll tell you a story. A buyer was represented by an agent. The buyers were crazy in love with this house, just wanted it so desperately that they told their agent to write. They were engaged to be married. So they told their agent to write the very best offer, $10,000 earnest deposit, blah, 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 blah. Wrote a really strong offer, and they won. Agent collects the earnest deposit and puts it in the five-star account, escrow account. A couple of days later, gets a message that the deal's off, that they had had a big fight over the weekend, and they were not only not going to buy the house together, they were not going to get married. And so the agent invoked the paragraph 15 on the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement and said they're bailing out of the transaction based on inspections. And the listing agent said, no, they're not. We found out they had a big fight and they're not getting married. And we learned that that's the reason that they don't want the house anymore. And the agent's response was, well, we still have the right to use the inspection period, so we'll set up a time for the inspections so that they can then legitimately use that inspection contingency. Guess what? They had already breached the contract. They had already breached the contract by disclosing to someone or having one of their friends learn and communicate that to the listing agent that they had had a big fight and weren't getting married and they didn't want a house. So all of a sudden, they're in breach of contract. Their termination using the inspection contingency was not valid. So whenever you get into a situation where an inspection contingency, whether it's inspection of the well or the septic or the structure, electrical, and so on, title work, survey, seller's disclosure. For example, a buyer has the right to terminate the contract unilaterally if they receive the seller's disclosure and choose to terminate within 72 hours or 120 hours if it's delivered by mail. Guess what? That also applies if new information has been discovered along the way. Let's say that an event occurs a week before the closing, and that event, for example, is a wet basement. Suddenly, this property has a wet basement. For some reason, we don't know why, we don't really care, but all of a sudden it has a wet basement. That seller has a legal responsibility to provide the buyer that new seller's disclosure with that information on it. By law, they're required to do that. When that buyer receives that information, they have the right to terminate, even though the inspection period is long since passed. The contingency regarding financing is long gone. You're right up against closing. But the fact that they have a new disclosure of condition that they provide to the buyer allows that buyer to walk away. So there are a number of cases throughout the course of a transaction which allow a buyer to walk away and the seller has absolutely no say over it. It's part of the contract that the seller signed at the very beginning. So, even though the buyer has the right to walk away, does the buyer immediately get their earnest money back? And the answer is no, because the seller has the right to contest the legitimacy of the buyer's termination. As I mentioned in the example earlier, they found out that it wasn't to do with the inspections at all because no inspections had occurred. It was about something else that they happened to find out through mutual friends. So here's where we get into an issue a lot. Buyers and buyers' agents think that because they have the unilateral right to terminate a contract due to inspections, well inspections, title, survey, seller's disclosure, that they can automatically hand the buyer a check back. That's not the case, because Five Star Real Estate also has to operate under escrow law in Michigan. We are the fiduciary for those escrow checks that we collect, those escrow amounts that we collect. Now, the question came up actually this morning: who holds the EMD? Should a title company hold it, or should Five Star hold it if we are working with the buyer? In my view, we have the greatest control if Five Star has control of that EMD. And I think that's really important. Once we give that control away to the title company, they are the only ones who have any authority over that earnest money deposit. They will most likely ask for a mutual release. In either case, if one party doesn't sign the mutual release, then we have to send out a 15-day, or I know in the case of GCAR, for example, it's a 30-day letter, which says if you don't contest this letter in writing, we will be releasing the earnest deposit to the buyer after 15 or 30 days, for example. So, again, I think it's really important that when we are acting as buyer's agents, that we do everything we can to get that money into a Five Star escrow account. I know there are areas that's impossible, that we don't have a 5-star account set up locally. I'll mention Jackson, I think, is one of those areas. Maybe Traverse City, I don't know. But I know that there are areas where it's not easy to get a earnest money deposited into a 5-star account. So I say that, but I also understand the exceptions.
We have a question.
Okay. I'm going to take a question. Before I take the question, let me say this. This is why it's really important to use the 2-document system that we've recommended for years, as long as I've been with the company, which is to terminate the contract per the inspections, for example, based on the inspections, and terminate that using an addendum, and then sending over a second document, which is a mutual release. I know that a lot of agents think that sending over a mutual release is sufficient to terminate the contract, but there are legal flaws in it. One of them being that in order to terminate the contract with a mutual release, both parties have to sign it, when in fact the purchase agreement allows for unilateral termination by the buyer under certain circumstances. So why would we suddenly require the seller to agree to terminate when we have the right to terminate for the buyer? The buyer has a right to terminate in the initial agreement. So the 2-document system is really important. There are legal reasons for doing it. Basically, the addendum terminates the contract. The mutual release determines who's going to get the money. So keep that in mind. Try to help that remind you as you go along. Okay, question.
This was from a few minutes ago.
Why can't I open this thing? Okay, let's go with that story. Agent is smart and doesn't say a word about the fight. Buyer's dad goes in and does inspections. That would work. Correct. Yes, it would. Simple answer. Yes. If you have information as a buyer's agent which is confidential to you or confidential to that buyer, for example, a big blow-up, then the buyer would have the right to say, I can go in and do the inspections, as it says in the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement. Other purchase agreements are different and do require different things from the inspector. Some of them require that they are certified. Others don't allow the buyer themselves to do the inspection. But let's say, in this case, they say, hey, Dad, will you go over and look at the property and tell me something that's wrong with the property? Maybe it has a broken switch plate cover. Maybe it has, a purple bedroom. Whatever it is, find something that will allow us to get out of the contract. And when Dad does that, for a 6-pack of beer or nothing, but anyway, but when that happens, then yes, you have the right to send over, as a buyer's agent, to send over an addendum that says, buyer hereby terminates contract based on inspections. Simple as that. You don't have to explain what those things are. You don't have to provide any documentation. Again, some of the purchase agreements out there do require some substantiation for a buyer getting out of a contract, or for a buyer's proposal that is based on the inspections. So it's really important to read your contracts and understand them. Okay, so I hope that helps as it regards unilateral terminations. Always use the 2-document step. Always keep it about, one of the situations that happened is that a buyer chose to walk away because they had bad feelings about the property. They had bad feelings about what the future held with COVID and the economy and all of these kinds of things. And so they thought that that was a legitimate reason, and so they terminated based on that. Unfortunately, the contract wasn't contingent upon their feelings about what the future held. So, bear in mind that when you're going to attempt to terminate a contract, it has to address what's in the contract. It can't be outside of the terms of the contract. I want to spend just a moment on appraisal guarantees. Again, we're running into a lot of agents who are calling and they want to use an appraisal guarantee and they can't find it in .loop, but it is located, I think, 2 or 3 clauses above the escalation clause language that is in there. So it's really important to, if you're going to use an appraisal guarantee, to make sure that you have the accurate language to use. You don't have to reinvent the wheel and figure it all out. You don't have to call the deal doctors. The information is right there for you to find, copy and paste in a matter of seconds. So if you can't find it, ask your whoever is your .loop specialist. You're welcome to call Eric or I or Kim and say, where would I find that? And they will tell you it's right above the escalation clause language in the clauses on .loop. If you don't know how to find the clauses on .loop, you click on what I call the little stone tablets, the templates icon up in the upper right-hand corner. There's only like 4. There's a smiley face, which is loops. There's something else, and then there's the 2 squares, which are templates. You click on that. It's the same place that you go and find all of the forms. It's down the left-hand side in blue. Go all the way to the bottom, and about the 2nd or 3rd from the bottom, you'll see clauses. Click on clauses, and it'll bring in all kinds of language that you can use in various situations, whether it's new construction, getting specifications from a builder within a certain period of time, and giving the buyer the option to opt out of the contract if those inspections don't arrive or don't arrive in time, escalation clauses, concessions, who's going to do the title work, all sorts of things. There's many of them in there. One of them is the appraisal guarantee. I think, in fact, it has the word appraisal to start it. Okay, last week, hello, Mr. Dom has another question on the different topic. This morning I got a purchase agreement. You have to go through a bunch of others to figure out what's missing. Was told me. On the topic of different contracts, agent gets a contract that is the proprietary contract of a franchise. Then they have to go through and figure out what's missing or what's different. Would it be wrong to tell, which takes a lot of time, and that's absolutely true if you're working out of market or an out of market buyer is sending you a contract. Let's say an agent who belongs to the Detroit MLS sends you an offer on their forms. It's going to be different than the forms that you are using, whether that's GCAR, West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement, TAR, JAR. They're all going to have differences. So, would it be wrong to tell agents they need to give a PA as a West Michigan regional purchase agreement? That's a tough one, because we as realtors are required to represent all offers. Unfortunately, it's part of our job as listing agents that we do have to go through and figure out what is different and identify those differences so that we can recommend action for our clients. You can try it, but let's pretend for a moment that the buyer's agent doesn't have access to the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement because they don't belong to one of the multiple listing and associations that use the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement. Let's say they're from somewhere up in East Tawas, and they don't use the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement, but they're submitting you an offer on their form. Part of our job is to figure out what that differences that form has. It may be about the manner in which taxes are prorated. It may have issues about assessments for utilities. There may be all manner of differences, but unfortunately, when they send us an offer, we can't say, well, it has to be written up on a West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement. We have to present it and have to have knowledge about it, and that's just part of what our responsibilities are. Now, you may try to ask of them to submit it on a West Michigan Purchase Agreement. Here's the power that you have when you're working with an out-of-market buyer. If they're out of market, let's say East Tawas, and they want to write an offer, they are not entitled to a commission because there is no reciprocal agreement with their MLS. So maybe a motivation would be to say, here's the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement. I have filled it out as best I could with the information you provided. This is a counteroffer on our form. Please sign it. And if your buyers sign it, we can move forward, and you will be paid a commission according to the co-brokerage agreement offered. There's an option for you. Jessica, no, not that one. All right, where were we? Again, escalation clauses. Tammy, since you're online, you created a spreadsheet, and it was beautiful. We walked through, and I think you're okay with me letting people know that you got a bunch of offers, and you had to sort through them, and the best way that you found to sort through them was to put them on a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet looked something like this. Okay, it looked a lot better than this, but there were 6 offers. I can't make it upside down 3, I'm sorry. Yes, I can. Okay. Anyway, it went through the pros and cons of each offer and what the caps were, okay? And then Tammy went through and made a bunch of comparisons. Well, guess what? These 2 over here were contingent upon the sale and closing of a house. Boom, they were out right away. None of these other 4 offers were contingent, and then it showed the caps and it showed the escalations and what they wanted in terms of appliances, closing dates, and it was a great chart. Tammy, if you want to share that with a group, by all means, please post it in this thread. It's a great chart you did, and I encourage agents to use something like that if they are going to evaluate and compare escalation clauses to get to the right price. As you know, last week, I got to the wrong price. Elizabeth Klops and Kelly Kalish pointed out that I was wrong on my final assessment. And so it's really important that you take the time to really examine the offers and reach the correct conclusion, even if it means laying it out on a spreadsheet and so that you can look at the high points of each one and make a decision that you recommend to your client that's best for your client. So I hope that helps. I hope I've helped provide you with some information today, and I will see you here next week. Any questions?
No.
Okay. See you next week.